Today, Donald Trump had what appears to be his largest entourage yet at his criminal trial in New York City. Among them, nearly a dozen Republican members of Congress, including Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert. And then there were hints of menace. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz tweeting a photo with the message, quote, "Standing back and standing by, Mr. President," the very same language Trump used in the first presidential debate in 2020 when referencing the far-right group, the Proud Boys, a message that the Proud Boys then took as marching orders in the lead-up to January 6th. Also in the courthouse today, a key architect in the January 6th coup, Jeffrey Clark, the former DOJ lawyer who was indicted in the Georgia case and also named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the federal prosecution of Trump over the attempted coup. Joining us now, Kyle Cheney, who was at the trial today. He is a senior legal affairs reporter for Politico with a focus on January 6th. And Andrew Weissman and Lisa Rubin are back with us. What a day for you to be in the room, given the way that this ties your expertise together.
Yeah, it was, you see all these threads of the different Donald Trump-related investigations sort of coming together here. As you've talked about, this has become kind of a loyalty test for a lot of his allies, and that has brought in people like Jeff Clark, who is not just an ally of Trump in the January 6th period, but is charged with him in Georgia, an alleged co-conspirator, and is an unnamed and unindicted co-conspirator in his Washington, D.C. case, too. So to see him sort of in the room as, again, a sort of a show of loyalty, I'm not even sure they're allowed to have contact under some of the release orders in those cases. So it was interesting to see them in the same proximity.
And to have Matt Gaetz saying standing.
Bringing this very, very overt reference to the Proud Boys. And, again, I don't know what kind of loyalty that's supposed to demonstrate, but it was sort of a very brazen thing. And the picture that he put up with it was him standing right behind Donald Trump in the hallway. So it was sort of an unmistakable reference.
Speaking of brazen rhetoric, Lisa, Donald Trump appeared to talk about one of the prosecutors in this trial today without naming him. Let's take a listen. We'll talk about it on the other side.
A lead person from the DOJ is running the trial. So Biden's office is running this trial.
Not true. Just to fact check that, Biden is not running this trial. What is he doing there?
What he's really doing there is daring Judge Juan Merchan to put him in jail, because the last time that Donald Trump was penalized for violating the gag order, Judge Merchan made it very clear to Donald Trump, you do this one more time, and I have other remedies at my disposal. The statute only provides me with two. One is a fine of up to $1,000 for each violation. The other is jail. And I don't want to exercise the jail option. It would be inconvenient. It would be disruptive to the administration of justice, but I will if I have to. And it almost seemed like Donald Trump was daring him to do it just to throw a bomb into the proceeding as it reaches its inevitable conclusion. We didn't hear from the DA today on it. We haven't seen the full transcript yet, so it's possible they mentioned it at a sidebar. But so far in open court, the district attorney's office has not said to Judge Merchan, this counts as a violation. That doesn't mean that they won't. And on Monday or beyond, we might hear from the DA's office that while they don't want this to interfere with the rest of the trial, it's possible that they'll say to the judge as it reaches its conclusion, hey, this happened while the jury is out. Now it's time for you to take some action.
It's the challenge for the DA, which is you describe this as being a distraction. And there are so many distractions when you're talking about Donald Trump. That is part of his entire theory of the case. So they are weighing, do we derail a case that is on its way to its conclusion, or do we deal with the fact that he's clearly, once again, not playing by the rules?
Yeah, and in addition to the statement that you played, there is at least some evidence that the sort of mini-me's who are auditioning for the vice president, presumably because they also want to be people who will be hung out to dry, like Vice President Pence. I mean, it's like nobody thinks about what happened to that person. Those people, it's not like they're just saying something that's unscripted. There's reporting that we've reported on that Donald Trump was editing what it is that they were supposed to say, which is, again, another violation of the gag order. And to tie it back to Michael Cohen that we've been talking about, Michael Cohen, when he testified before Congress and was being attacked by Republicans in his testimony, he said, look, I know what you're doing. I used to be you. I mean, I used to do that for Donald Trump, and I'm telling you, it's like a fool's errand. And so you're seeing this again with people who are thinking, oh, no, I can be the vice president. And look what Vice President Pence is, one, what happened to him on January 6th. And two, it's remarkable that you have a former vice president who is not actually endorsing the person he was serving as president. forth.
When I think about what it was that Matt Gaetz tweeted out, all I can think of is the fact that in so many ways they are creating a permission structure for future violence, whether that is related to the outcome of this court case, whether that is related to the outcome of the election, that they see 1/6 as a precursor, as a preamble to whatever is coming next, not simply something that is in the past that has been reckoned with.
Well, I think a lot of the forces that led to January 6th are still present in our politics, and I think that the outcome of some of these cases and whether the justice system is up to the task of holding former president accountable, whether these cases even get tried at all. That's really the question right now. And regardless of the outcome, to not have them hanging over this election process, is a live issue. And I think that we don't. I think whatever happens there is going to be, telling about the direction of the country.
Can you help me understand, Lisa, given the amount of time that you have spent in that courtroom, how it is that people get into that courtroom, how they get seated, and what it tells you that he has about a dozen folks?
I am so glad that you asked me this question, because today on the record, from the DA's office, they basically said, hey, you had a bunch of surrogates for the former president who came in at an awkward moment. They were basically disruptive of the cross-examination. They came in at a time that members of the public wouldn't be allowed to come in and out. Could you ask them to stop doing that? And Todd Blanche, for his part, said, 1, I don't control these people. 2, they're members of the public. Let's accept his first proposition that Todd Blanche, as a member of the legal team, doesn't control them. The proposition that they are members of the public is simply belied by what we can see. They do not come in the same public courthouse entry that Andrew and Kyle and I come in every day. From what we can tell, they are transported with the former president. They are admitted into his bubble by the Secret Service. Whether they undergo additional security at that back entrance to the courthouse from which Trump enters is not clear to us. But what I can tell you is this. They enter the courthouse through the president's holding room, which we understand is an additional courtroom that's been cleared. They come out with him as he makes his statements to the press in the hallway, and then they enter the courtroom with him in this bizarre procession that almost resembles a militaristic parade. It's a long line, almost in hierarchical order of importance, of who comes in with him: the legal team, the aides, members of Congress, etc. To call them members of the public, akin to the guy that you showed on tape earlier, who had been waiting in line for hours and hours, that's just simply not an apt or fair comparison. And I want to say one other thing. Matt Gaetz might be making statements that, make our jaws drop, and Donald Trump might be violating the gag order, but some of these people don't have to say a word. And that's because from where they are sitting, each of the witnesses is marched directly in front of the first row of Trump observers. Each side, meaning the prosecution and the defense, has the first 2 rows of the gallery in the courtroom. That means if you're Michael Cohen this morning, who did you walk by? Eric Trump. As you are trying to get into the courtroom to your seat, you're not walking down the center aisle of the courtroom as we see in so many procedural dramas, but rather in a separate entrance designed to maximize your security and your protection from the remainder of the public, given what is going on here and how controversial it is with some members of the public.